in China, and you discover it one day, but by the next day, 300,000 people have arrived at various airports carrying the epidemic. The latency is so short that you can't do anything about it. And this is all part of this ingression into this kind of novelty. And that I've given you a scary example, but there's also very positive examples. The Arab Spring was an example of energy, disaffected youth who are vastly unemployed and likely to remain so, pent up energy, pent up with the tools of Twitter and the internet and mobile devices, were able to crank up revolutions and push out these terrible regimes that have been there for 30, 40 years. And the latency was short. And so they were able to use that. The world media could easily get a cell phone video of a violent protest in Libya. If the guy can find a few spare bandwidth to squirt it out, and suddenly it's all over the world and everyone's seeing it. So the latency worked for them. It became a lever which they could move something that was considered impossible. So that would seem to be, if you're going to make a huge change in the world, and if you're going to seek singularities or seek transformation, those are the two things that either work for you or against you, but you need to understand them. And here's a good one for you. This is a personal theory I've been developing for a while, which is in the 60s, and Galen's heard this before, the baby boomer generation did very well by going into the streets and protesting, say, against the Pentagon or against the Johnson administration or against the intolerance toward people of color. And there were very identifiable institutions and people that you could hold a placard up against. But today, I really believe that it's whole systems where there really isn't one individual or one group to blame. If we're looking around for someone to blame for the financial crisis, it's very hard to find. Because if your neighbor, again, if they refinance their house 4 times, kind of with this deep internal sense that, what if the value of this home goes down? Well, I'll think about that later. They're a party to the financial crisis. So what it comes down to and what we're grappling with now is that it's a whole complex system that we have to tame, that we have to understand. People game the system, but the system is there, and you have to change the code in the operating system. This is a lot like Terence's ideas of which cultural OS have you loaded. Well, Larry Lessig, in the years since Terence developed this whole idea of code and other laws of cyberspace, that code will run the world, and you have to understand that. There's legal code, which we know and we love and detest, and then there actually is code in the system that will run the world. So the people who are going to be able to make the change are not the 60s radicals. They're the 20-somethings and maybe the 30-somethings who are gainfully unemployed, but who deeply understand PHP and complex web GUIs and apps and data flows and databases. And those are the people who can basically look out, and they don't see, the old-fashioned political movement. They say we need to build a whole new technology for electoral systems in the U.S. We can do that. We can make voting work without money in campaigns because it's a code problem, and it's changing existing code, changing laws perhaps, moving people around, but it's also infrastructure. So we are seeing the generation rise who understand whole systemic thinking, who don't resort to the simple and easy blame game. But will this generation come to the fore? Will they be able to unseat the powers that be who game systems, who are victims of systems? Will this generation come and rewrite our code?
And also, as neuroscientists are increasingly beginning to understand, it's a matter of loading not just the operating system of the mind, such that one can change these systems, but also loading the operating system of the heart and soul, because the brain operates at multiple speeds. And in order to feel one's way through, one must slow down the brain. To love, one must look, and one must take the time to look. So it's a matter of split-second reaction to events, guided by an ability to slow down enough at the same time to take a whole look and feel your way through what principles of the heart need to guide your split-second reaction to this extraordinary influx of information. It's kind of like riding the local and express train at the same time. I think the 20-somethings can do it. I think they can load both programs simultaneously. I happen, as a 60s radical myself, to think that the 60s radicals may be struggling, but they also, as a group, are pretty good at doing it and understanding what's necessary.
Well, I just happen to live in a place where there are a lot of 60s radicals. It's a former hippie commune out in rural Tennessee, and there are a number of people who hold values that I think they probably consider progressive, but values and viewpoints and a cognitive operating system that largely remains unchanged from, say, 1974. And Bruce, you were talking earlier about how you travel all over the world and you see just a lot of dynamism in places like China and Pakistan and places where, on average, people are much younger than they are in the United States. And the places like United States and Japan, you've got an aging population. You've got a fairly large chunk of the population who is unlikely to install a new operating system in this lifetime. They have been operating with the same one for 30, maybe 50 years, and it serves them as well as it serves them. And that operating system that they're running is, to some extent, a fact of life that the younger people just have to deal with and work around. And I wonder if you think that these other places that you've talked about maybe have that sort of dynamism, largely because they do have so many young people who are able to adopt new and more nimble operating systems and just adapt more quickly and with more panache to changing circumstances.
I know what you mean about a kind of ossified, quote-unquote, liberal consciousness.
Yeah.
Like the kind of diehard, yes, we are liberal Democrat kind of thing. And you just think, oh, my God, this is ever going to... or that there is a kind of entrenchedness that I'm sure you feel that makes you...
But it's a warm, fuzzy entrenchedness.
That's true.
Yeah, there's the most unlikely country, I think, is a very good example of this and a hope for this, which is Pakistan. And all we see about Pakistan in the news is that it's the new pariah state, that it's a nightmare unfolding, that it's going to break up, that it's somehow going to become Talibanized. But the reality is, when you go there, and I go to Islamabad, reasonably frequently these days, you see a very dynamic society. You see an open and free press that was ironically established under the military rule of Musharraf. You see a very incapable and many people say corrupt civilian government, a very strong Supreme Court, a judiciary, an independent judiciary, and that 40% of the population, I think, is under 33, and they are the ones that I meet, progressive and concerned and world tied to the world. They're dealing with the hegemony of the U.S. and the fumbling incompetency of the U.S. operating from Pakistan and in Pakistan with these drone attacks and things like this. Is the complete fumbling, irrelevant, wrong approach. And so these young people are looking out at their corrupt boomer generation civilian government. But that they do see rising there is a fellow named Imran Khan, who was the greatest cricketer, one of the greatest cricketers in the history of the sport, who's a person beyond reproach, who's not squirreled away billions outside the country, who's founded a party called the PTI, and wherever he goes now, he gets a Kennedy-like huge receptions of hundreds of thousands of these young people who say, this is the man. And Imran Khan's platform is, I want to get rid of the corruption that is bleeding our society. He's in a sense political. He just wants good governance. And so was perhaps the hope for Obama, but as soon as Obama got inside the Beltway, he got corrupted by the process, and perhaps he was too much of a conciliator. There were enemies to the system that he needed to tackle head on, and it wasn't healthcare, it was money corruption in politics that he needed to deal with right away. But he didn't. He became sucked into the Beltway thinking. But Imran Khan, if elected, and if he makes it and he survives, he may well lead a complete new society and of all countries, Pakistan, a country with so many more problems than the United States has. It's off the scale. We think we have problems and challenges. We do not compared to a place like Pakistan. So if they can do it, and if that youth generation gets its leadership and they can do it, they're a model for the world.
Well, let us hope so. We've been on the phone for 50 minutes now, so we have run out of time for this conversation.